Belo Horizonte, March 17, 1980, the capital of Minas. Gerais was experiencing a period of intense urbanization and population growth. The city's center was buzzing with the movement of workers and merchants who filled the streets of the financial heart of the metropolis every day. It was in this setting that Roberto Carlos Mendes, a 42-year-old respected merchant and owner of a small electrical supply store on Avenida Amazonas, disappeared without a trace. Roberto was known for his almost obsessive punctuality. He lived in the Serra neighborhood, about 4 kilometers from downtown, in a modest apartment where he had lived alone since his divorce 3 years earlier. That Monday, the sky was overcast with a light drizzle, typical of the early autumn in Minas Gerais. At 7:15, as usual, Roberto left his home wearing a gray suit, his brown leather briefcase, and a black umbrella. He was seen by the building's doorman, Sebastião Ferreira, who would later tell authorities that this was the last time he saw the merchant. Roberto's routine was unchanging. He would have coffee at the bakery on the corner of Rua das Corrijos, arrive at the store around 8 a.m., have lunch at the Papagayo restaurant at 12:30 p.m., and return to work until 10 p.m. when he would close the store. However, that day, something broke the routine. Roberto never arrived at the store. His employee, José Antonio da Silva, 25 years old, found it odd that his boss, who had never missed work without prior notice, was late. I waited until 9 a.m. I called his house several times, but no one answered. I found it very strange because Mr. Roberto was extremely responsible and never was late. José told the authorities when, at the end of the day, he decided to report the disappearance to the central police station. Roberto's sister, Maria Helena Mendes, 38 years old, a public school teacher, was the one who officially filed the police report. My brother had no enemies. He was a discreet, hard-working man. He was never involved in anything illegal. He had no vices, did not frequent suspicious places. He simply disappeared, she told investigators, visibly shaken. The first 48 hours after Roberto's disappearance were crucial. The police conducted searches at the city's hospitals, checked traffic accident records, and interrogated neighbors, friends, and acquaintances. Roberto's apartment was thoroughly searched, but nothing seemed out of place. His toothbrush, personal documents, and the spare keys to the store were all there, suggesting he had planned to return. The only item missing was the brown leather briefcase he carried with him every day to work. A key witness emerged on the third day of the investigation. Antonio Gomesi, a street vendor who worked near Roberto's store, claimed to have seen the merchant enter a commercial building on Rua das Tupinambas, about 200 meters from his business, at around 8 a.m. that morning. He was talking to a taller man in a dark suit. It seemed like a normal conversation. I didn't see anything suspicious, Antonio told the police. The building in question, the Edificio Tupinamba, was a 7-story commercial building constructed in the 1950s, housing various law offices, accounting firms, and an insurance agency on the ground floor. The building's administration was contacted, but no official record of Roberto's entry was found, as the building did not have a security access system at that time. If you want to follow more cases like this, which affect society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any investigations. The following weeks after Roberto Carlos Mendes' disappearance were marked by an intense but frustrating investigation. Police Chief Helio Matos, who was in charge of the case, set up a task force with 5 investigators to scour every possible lead. Security cameras, so common today, were practically non-existent in downtown Belo Horizonte in 1980, which greatly hindered the police work. We are working on all possibilities: kidnapping, voluntary escape, accident, or even a premeditated crime. Chief Matos said in a press conference 10 days after the disappearance. Roberto's family, however, strongly rejected the possibility of voluntary escape. My brother had just taken out a loan to expand the store. He had plans. He was excited about the future. Why would he run away? Questioned Maria Helena, who became the family's spokesperson in the relentless search for her brother's whereabouts. The store's accounting records were carefully examined. Roberto kept meticulous records of all transactions. There was no indication of financial problems or embezzlement. His bank statements showed a stable financial life with no suspicious transactions. The loan mentioned by Maria Helena had been approved a week before his disappearance in the amount of 350,000 reals, about 140,000 reals in current value, and was intended for purchasing new stock and renovating the store. One line of investigation came up when Jose Antonio, Roberto's employee, mentioned a dissatisfied customer who had made threats 2 weeks before the disappearance. It was a man who bought a large batch of materials for a construction project, then returned saying that part of the material was defective and demanded a full refund. Mr. Roberto offered to exchange only the defective pieces, but the man became furious, Jose reported. The customer in question, Paulo Ferreira, a 52-year-old contractor, was located and interrogated. Despite his explosive temper, he had a solid alibi for the day of the disappearance. He was in Juiz de Fora, 280 kilometers away from Belo Horizonte, supervising a construction project, a fact confirmed by several employees and a local hotel register. Meanwhile, the Edificio Tupinamba, the last place Roberto had been seen, was searched floor by floor. Employees were interviewed, offices were searched with judicial authorization, but no trace of the merchant was found. The building's doorman. At the time, Geraldo Almeida, 61 years old, did not remember seeing Roberto that morning, but admitted that the flow of people was intense, making it impossible to remember everyone who came in and out. An intriguing clue emerged when the police interviewed Clarice Oliveira, secretary at a law office on the 4th floor of the building. That week, I noticed a strange smell in the hallway near the emergency staircase. I mentioned it to the janitor, but he said it was probably a plumbing issue, she reported. The janitor, Jorge Santos, confirmed the report, but stated that he had checked the plumbing and found nothing abnormal. 3 months after the disappearance, the case began to cool down. The leads were running out, witnesses were not providing new information, and the police, pressured by other cases, gradually reduced the resources dedicated to the investigation. However, Roberto's family did not give up. Maria Helena hired a private detective, Arnaldo Neves, a former police officer with 25 years of experience. Neves took a different approach, focusing on Roberto's last phone contacts and potential connections with the Edificio Tupinambas. I found that Roberto had called 3 times to a phone number registered under the name of Marcos Pereira, a lawyer with an office on the 5th floor of the Edificio Tupinambas, in the week before his disappearance, Neves revealed in his preliminary report. When questioned, Marcos Pereira admitted knowing Roberto, but denied any involvement in his disappearance. He consulted me about issues related to a loan he was negotiating. Nothing beyond that, the lawyer stated. The phone records confirmed that there had been calls, but the content of the conversations remained unknown. The investigation reached an impasse. Police Chief Helio Matos, pressured by the family and the local press, which was beginning to lose interest in the case, stated in September 1980, "We will continue investigating, but we need new leads. We ask the public to report any information, no matter how small it seems, to the police." Roberto Carlos Mendes' case gradually became part of the statistics of unsolved disappearances in Brazil. The family kept hope alive, distributing leaflets with his photo and details. Maria Helena even appeared on a local television program, pleading for information, but as time passed, the answers never came. December 1987, 7 years after Roberto Carlos Mendez' disappearance, the Edificio Tupinambas, where the merchant was last seen, was undergoing a complete renovation after being acquired by a business group that planned to modernize it. The original structure, built in the 1950s, had plumbing and electrical issues, requiring extensive intervention. On the morning of December 3rd, a macabre discovery would completely change the course of the investigation that had cooled years. Earlier, Josias Pereira, a 34-year-old mason, was working on demolishing a false wall in the corridor on the 5th floor, near the emergency staircase, when he came across something that made his blood run cold. When I broke the wall, I saw something that looked like fabric. I thought it was some sort of old insulation, but when I removed more bricks, I saw a shoe, and then I realized it was a body. Josias reported, visibly shaken, to police detective Claudio Montero, who took over the case after Helio Mato's retirement. The Medical Legal Institute was immediately called. The body, in an advanced state of decomposition, was found in a vertical position inside the wall, as if it had been placed standing up and then bricked in. It was wearing a gray suit, and beside the remains was a partially deteriorated brown leather briefcase. The news spread quickly throughout the city. Maria Helena Mendez was called to possibly identify belongings. Upon seeing the briefcase and a wristwatch found with the body, she collapsed in tears. "It's his. It's the watch I gave Roberto for his 40th birthday. It has the initials RCM engraved on the back," she confirmed. The dental analysis, comparing Roberto's dental records with the remains found, officially confirmed the victims' identity. In January 1988, the IML report pointed to the cause of death as mechanical asphyxiation by strangulation, indicating that Roberto had been killed before being bricked in. The body was placed in that space when it was still fresh, probably just hours after death. The wall was then quickly sealed with bricks and plaster, a task that would have required technical knowledge of construction, explained Dr. Paulo Rezende, the forensic pathologist. The investigation was reopened with full force. The focus was now on the 5th floor of the Edificio Tupinambas, specifically on the occupants of the offices near the place where the body was found. In 1980, 3 offices occupied that floor. Marcos Pereira's law office, a pharmaceutical sales office managed by Carlos Eduardo Vieira, and a small construction company, Edificar Ingenieria, owned by Antonio Carlos Magalhães. Investigators discovered that during the week of Roberto's disappearance, Edificar Ingenieria had carried out small renovations in their office, including the construction of a partition in the hallway to create a storage room. According to building management records, the person in charge of the work was José Carlos Ferreira, a 48-year-old foreman. When the police tried to locate José Carlos, they found out he had moved to the interior of Minas Gerais shortly after the renovation was completed. A team was sent to Montes Claros, where the foreman had last been seen, but local residents reported that he had left the city at least 5 years earlier. The search for José Carlos intensified, and in March 1988, he was located in Goiânia, living under the name Paulo Henrique Silva. When confronted by the police, he initially denied his true identity, but eventually confessed after being presented with irrefutable evidence. José Carlos's confession revealed disturbing details. According to him, he had been hired by Antonio Carlos Magalhães, the owner of Edificar Ingenieria, to deal with a problem involving Roberto Carlos Mendez. Magalhães told me that Mendez was threatening to expose a bidding fraud scheme involving electrical materials supplied by his store. "I received 100,000 reals to scare him, but things got out of control," he confessed. Leave a comment if you believe that the truth should never be abandoned. and that all missing persons deserve to be found. Jose Carlos Ferreira's confession paved the way for the complete resolution of a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 8 years. The foreman detailed how he lured Roberto Carlos Mendez to the edificio, Tupinambas, on that fateful morning in March 1980. I called him the day before, introducing myself as a businessman interested in making a large order of electrical materials for a construction project. I arranged a meeting in the building's lobby at 8 a.m. When he arrived, I took him to the 5th floor, telling him I wanted to show him the type of installation that would need to be done. Jose Carlos told the investigators, on the 5th floor, near the emergency staircase, Jose Carlos confronted Roberto about alleged evidence he had against Antonio Carlos Magalhães. According to the foreman, the initial intent was simply to intimidate Roberto and force him to hand over documents that were supposed to be in his briefcase. Roberto denied having any compromising documents. He became nervous and tried to leave. I grabbed him by the arm. We started to fight, and I ended up squeezing his neck too hard. When I realized he was already dead, Jose Carlos confessed, visibly disturbed as he recalled the crime. The killer explained that he panicked and called Magalhães, who ordered that the body be hidden immediately. I was doing a renovation at the Edificar office, creating a storage room with a false wall in the corridor. I decided to put the body inside that space before closing it completely. I worked alone during the night when the building was empty. He explained, based on Jose Carlos's confession, Antonio Carlos Magalhães was arrested in April 1988. He initially denied any involvement, but eventually caved when confronted with bank evidence showing a suspicious transfer to Jose Carlos's account shortly after Roberto's disappearance. The investigation revealed that Magalhães was involved in an overbilling scheme in public contracts. His construction company supplied inferior quality materials for public works, and the difference in cost was split between him and corrupt City Hall employees. Roberto had discovered the scheme when supplying electrical materials for one of the projects and noticed discrepancies in the orders. Roberto threatened to expose the scheme unless they stopped immediately. He was an honest man. He couldn't stand corruption, Maria Helena said to the newspapers when the details of the case were revealed. He died because of his integrity. The lawyer Marcos Pereira, who had previously admitted contact with Roberto, was also investigated. It was discovered that he was responsible for drafting fraudulent contracts for Edificar Engenharia. He was indicted as an accomplice in the murder and obstruction of justice. The trial, held in November 1988, attracted great attention from both local and national media. Jose Carlos Ferreira was sentenced to 18 years in prison for homicide and concealment of a corpse. Antonio Carlos Magalhães was sentenced to 24 years for being the mastermind behind the crime and for active corruption. Marcos Pereira was sentenced to 8 years for complicity and obstruction of justice. The case of Roberto Carlos Mendez left deep marks on the society of Belo Horizonte. The discovery of his body bricked up in the Edificio Tupinambas, a place through which thousands of people passed daily for years without ever imagining what was hidden behind that wall, caused shock and reflection on how dark secrets can remain hidden in plain sight. For Roberto's family, especially his sister Maria Helena, who never gave up on seeking answers, the outcome brought a mixture of relief and renewed pain. At least now we can give my brother a proper burial. He can finally rest in peace, she said after the funeral held in December 1988. Nearly 9 years after the disappearance, the Edificio Tupinambas, forever marked by this macabre story, underwent complete revitalization after the case. The area where the body was found was fully renovated, and a small plaque in memory of Roberto Carlos Mendez was placed in the lobby by the new owners. The legacy of the case went beyond the resolution of a crime It led to a broader investigation into corruption in public contracts in Belo Horizonte, resulting in the arrest of 3 City Hall employees and the review of dozens of suspicious bids. Public works inspection practices were restructured, creating stricter control mechanisms. The case also highlighted flaws in the system for investigating missing persons in Brazil. In 1992, partially inspired by the Mendes case, the Specialized Police Department for Missing Persons was created in Minas Gerais, one of the first of its kind in the country, dedicated exclusively to such occurrences. 3 decades after the resolution of Roberto Carlos Mendes' case, his legacy lives on in the collective memory of Belo Horizonte and in the Brazilian criminal justice system. What began as a mysterious disappearance in 1980 and culminated with the macabre discovery of a bricked-up body in 1987 became an important milestone for missing persons investigations in the country. In 2010, Maria Helena Mendes, by then 68 years old, founded the Associação Mineira de Famílias de Desaparecidos, MFD, an organization that provides psychological and legal support to families facing similar situations. The pain of not knowing what happened to a loved one is indescribable. For 7 years, I lived every day with this anguish. I don't want other families to go through the same thing without having someone to help, she explained at the opening ceremony of the association. The Edificio Tupinamba, completely renovated and modernized, today houses technology companies and startups. Few of the current occupants know about the dark history that took place there. The small plaque in memory of Roberto, which was placed in the lobby, was removed during a renovation in 2005, but was replaced by a more discreet memorial on the 5th floor, near the spot where his body was found. Chose Eacute Carlos Ferreira served 14 years of his sentence and was released in 2002 for good behavior. According to records, he moved to the interior of Parana, where he lived reclusively until he passed away in 2018 from lung cancer. Antonio Carlos Magalhães, the mastermind behind the crime, died in prison in 1997 after suffering a heart attack. Marcos Pereira, after serving his sentence, tried to resume his legal career but had his registration revoked by the OAB, Brazilian Bar Association. His current whereabouts are unknown. The Mendes case is now studied in police academies and law schools as an example of investigative perseverance and the importance of not prematurely closing missing persons cases. If the family had given up, if the building had never been renovated, Roberto would have been just another number in the statistics of missing persons, observes Detective Claudio Montero, now retired, who led the final phase of the investigation. In 2020, 40 years after the disappearance, the civil police of Minas Gerais launched the Mendes Method, a specific investigative protocol for missing persons cases, which establishes standardized procedures and minimum deadlines before an investigation can be considered inactive. The protocol emphasizes the importance of periodically revisiting unresolved cases and maintaining regular contact with the victims' families. Roberto Carlos Mendes' story also inspired changes in Brazilian legislation. In 2019, Law 13.812 was passed, known as the Immediate Search Law, which mandates immediate investigation in cases of missing children and adolescents. While focused on minors, the law recognizes the critical importance of the first hours after a disappearance, a painful lesson learned in the Mendes case and many others. My brother was a simple man who believed in honesty and justice. He never imagined that his integrity would lead to his death, but his sacrifice was not in vain. Today, thanks to the publicity of his case, other families have a better chance of finding answers, reflected Maria Helena in an interview at the Missing Persons Quarter Sanders. The case also illustrates how the truth, no matter how painful, brings necessary closure for families. For 7 years, Roberto's relatives lived in the agony of uncertainty, alternating between the hope of finding him alive and the fear that something terrible had happened. The discovery of his body, though devastating, allowed the family to finally begin the grieving process and seek justice. If you watched until the end, it's because you care about these cases that forever mark families. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end so I can know you and see who truly cares about the search for the truth." The narrator urges, today, missing persons cases in Brazil continue to be a challenge for authorities. It is estimated that approximately 80,000 people go missing annually in the country, according to data from the Brazilian Forum on Public Security. Many of these cases remain unsolved, and families continue the anguishing search for answers. Roberto Carlos Mendes' story reminds us that behind every statistic is a life, a destroyed family, and often dark secrets waiting to be uncovered. As a society, we have the responsibility to not forget and to not allow these cases to be simply filed away and forgotten as time passes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video. Every share could help keep the memory of those who disappeared alive and, who knows, bring new leads for unsolved cases. The truth, no matter how painful, is always the first step towards justice and healing.